Akulmach, in our literature section, we are discussing the rise of Middle English literature. And to discuss this topic, we are joined by Dr. G. Revati. So, without wasting any further moment, let's welcome her. Welcome to the show, Dr. Revati. How are you doing today?
Good, ma'am. Namaste. Going good. Yeah.
Okay, and as you know, and even audience, they know that we are discussing a quite interesting subject regarding the rise of English literature, English language as such. So today, I think we will be discussing much more interesting aspect, and when the rise of literature happened, especially in England. So. Tell me where we want to start the Middle English, how the rise of Middle English started.
Yeah. So basically, the earlier part we were discussing about Anglo-Saxon, where three tribal people invaded England, and that was how it came up to be an Old English period. Now, moving on further, then there was again another invasion that was from Normans. Normans from France, where they belonged to Normandy, once again invaded England. So from then on, the Middle English period begins. So that was a Battle of Hastings, which happened in 1066. William, the Duke of Normandy, defeated Harold Godwinson in 1066 in the Battle of Hastings. Then he became the King of England after defeating Harold Godwinson, and the Anglo-Norman period started in 1066, which is also called as the Middle English period. Okay, so most significant and important one was the French language impression, which got mixed with the English language being spoken at that time. And Anglo-Norman, it was actually a French dialect spoken by the Normans and was the dominant language in England between approximately 1100 to 1350 or so. And another aspect of this is, it's in fact, Middle English period is a very huge chunk. So it is actually divided as the period, the old, the Norman, Anglo-Norman English period is divided into two, that is age before Chaucer and during Chaucer, age of Chaucer. That is one aspect. And this Anglo-Normans, basically, in fact, invasion of Normans over England was a blessing in disguise, because unlike Anglo-Saxons and Jews, they weren't tribal people. They were polished people who invaded. And it was, in fact, a blessing for them. And later on, everything changed. And there was a lot of French, influence of French on the people of England, who were actually the people who were into Old English, and then came a lot of change after that. And then the age before Chaucer is a period where a lot of literature has come in. And then one of the most important aspect which you happen to notice during this period is most of the writings were either religious or historic kind of writings, or kind of romantic kind of writings. And when you look at the literature, first and foremost, you have to also look into the aspect of the people, the society then. Okay, and first, another important thing which I wanted to discuss here is impact of Norman conquest. What did it have an impact on England? So it was like almost like a master and a servant relationship during the Anglo-Norman period. So later on, they unified and became one nation. The result of their unification was that Norman French and Anglo-Saxon languages were mixed and a new language was made. This was Anglo-Norman English. And it is also known as in-between language. Why is it called an in-between? Is it because it's in the Middle English period? No, it's because it is in the middle of two extremes. One is the Old English period, which is of Old English, the other being the Modern English. And Middle English is such that it was in a phase of transition. The language English was continuously evolving at that point of time. So this was actually called as the English of the middle, between language, known as in between language. So the new language was different from Old English because of French language influence. So William the Conqueror replaces the English bishops, church officials with Normans. Numerous cathedrals were built. Normans set up a feudal system in England. They maintained a complete record of people and property in England. And a centralized government was established. People started thinking of one nation and started showing interest in the history of the England because of the national identity they were gaining. It is like this, when somebody gets to know that they are into as a one nation and one country, they start feeling, as if they belong to that country. And then they start looking for the history of the country. So, and then the literature.
I just want to, this quite an interesting aspect and quite an interesting way of development of culture, language, and that also goes hand in hand. And as you say, that there is a rise of architectural renaissance, I can say in that way. So that is always there. But I just also want to ask you that I was reading yesterday, and I found that very important aspect of the press. And then printing press has actually gave a way to this all rise. So what you will say, and what kind of literature is became very popular even today? There are literature where people read. So please reflect on that aspect too.
Okay. So basically, if I have to talk about the printing press, that was way beyond Chaucer's period. So it was not before Chaucer. So because of lack of printing press itself, this age is also called as the Dark Ages. So the Old English period and the period just before the Chaucer is also considered as the Dark Ages, just because there was no printing press, there were no advancement in scientific things, and the education also was not in reach of the common people. So the Caxton's printing press comes after Chaucer, the age of Chaucer. Yes, that has, and I'm so it also added a lot of kind of development in the literature part of it. It played a pivotal role in adding up vocabulary, standardizing the language, and so on. So basically, before that, the people were, as I told you, were more interested in the historical writing. So they started with literature which reflected about the history, the past history of the nation, such as the first work which I'd like to mention here is Historia Regum Britannia. So it's basically the history of the kings of Britain. And it's written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, a Welsh monk who actually wrote this Historia Regum Britannia in 1136 as a complete history of the Britons in Latin. He collected several Celtic legends and reframed them through his imagination book as historiography. However, this book has, in fact, acted as a source material for later writers such as Shakespeare's King Lear, Malory's Mortality Author, and Tennyson's Idylls of the King were actually founded on this work of Geoffrey. So this is basically a historical collection of the events of the Old Saxon period, that was during Celtic period. Okay, and there's another book or the writer or the written work or the literature of Laymon's Brut, the Chronicle of Britain. So this is something very interesting, that this is a chronicle where it's written in the form of a verse, a poetic verse. So he completed this chronicle work in 1205, and it consists of about 30,000 lines. So here he describes the history of England from the point when the Brutus landed till the death of the last Briton king. Then he was actually an English priest, and In 1200, he started it in the form of rhyming chronicle. And this is a chronicle, in fact, it has to be in the form of a prose. No, but he had brought it out in the form of a rhyme. And the poem begins with the destruction of Troy and escape of Aeneas, the Duke, into Italy. And then the final part of the poem is about King Arthur and his knights. So this is something which is long and is the first historiography written in English since the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. And it can also be called one of the first national epic in English. So these some of the the write-ups or the literature, the works of the people, which is related to history. So the Caxton Press, as I told you, it comes post age of Chaucer. So I think it's big lack of this printing press and lack of education among the masses and the common people, and there was not much of intellect development. This was also called as the age of darkness.
Fine. Actually, it's quite interesting because this is the first time as I'm not English a student, but I have read English, and I have come to know that there is a kind of collection of history of kings who ruled England. So that's quite interesting. At this point, I would like to ask you, like if I take example of Indian language development, and it was always generation to generation, though the period which we are discussing is quite a small period, but with the lack of printing press, and when you're talking about such a huge and eclectic literature, so how it survived?
Right. That is how it so happened they have brought it out in the form of manuscripts. Fine. Then some of the people have actually preserved it, and most of the time it was narration, as I told you. But during Anglo-Norman period, they started writing. And one more interesting thing is it was all anonymous. They found only the written literature here, which was not named by any author. I mean, who had written it? Absolutely no clue about it, because nowhere it has been mentioned. And this is particularly because people never thought of claiming their ownership on these writings. Okay. And then coming to the point where, uh, uh, and it being so anonymous, and, it was just preserved. And there was one man called Robert Cotton. And somewhere in the 16th, 15th, and 16th century, because of his interest, he started collecting all these manuscripts. And most of the time, this was the reading and writing done by the upper class people only. And most of the writers lived in London, and especially the writers. And the reading also was accessible only for the upper class people. Now, lower class or the middle class people was possible only after when the education started gaining importance, especially after the Cambridge University and the Oxford University came into existence. And then people started moving towards these educational institutions, and then they learned to read and write. And then they were aware of it. Then after which the printing press also had added up to this kind of growth of language. That is, they started converting, the translating Latin work into English, to vernacular, to the regional languages, in order to ensure that even a common man could get access to it. But basically, by and large, all the written literature is only been taken up, based on their kind of writing and the style of writing, because most of them are anonymous, except for a few. They have written their names and signed on the written documents, and we never know. They also can be pseudonyms, may not be the real names, but still, whatever it is, based on their the manuscripts which were found and preserved, then it just was passed on to the people.
Very interesting, very interesting. And I now want to take you towards that era. As you know, that this era is being divided into two. This is pre-Norman and the post, when the development of printing press is done. So let's discuss about that era, because then two are combined, but it's divided on the progress of the literature. That is how I really look at. So we would like to discuss what in the later period when the printing press came into being, and then the rise of literature. Can we discuss that also?
Right. So basically, if we are actually talking about the age of Chaucer. When we talk about the printing press, and that is the age which comes after age of Chaucer.
Okay. Okay.
So I also would like to give a small mention about the rise of drama in England.
Okay.
Okay, and the rise of drama where they had, and this is the drama concept which was taken from France, and where France or the Europe for that matter, where they already started it, and then slowly it was brought into England. And but initially, and there was not much clarity among these styles of dramas, such as the mystery play or the miracle play or the morality play. Now, these were the three plays which were put up in churches, and the actors or the characters were mostly the priests, the clergymen, and so on, and they would, speak in Latin. And then the common people or the minor roles which were taken up by the English people would speak in English. And basically, there was not much difference between the morality, the mystery play and the miracle play. So miracle play usually was a play which was all about the lives of the saints, whereas the mystery play was all about the Bible, all these stories of the Bible which were taken in. But whatever it is, all those which were put up in England, as I told you, it was not very clear, and they started with a play which, for everything, they have given a name as the miracle play. And yes, then moving on to the printing thing and age of Chaucer, which comes after Anglo-Norman period, that was in 1350 to 1400. Now, very interesting thing, it is like, the entire age is named after this laureate, or the man who's a gigantic figure, who's Chaucer. And he was born in 1340 to 1400, and born in London, very fairly well-to-do family. And they were quite good. The life was, he had seen a lot of upheavals, and it was ups and downs in Chaucer's life. And then coming to, as far as the history of English history is concerned, he was the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey. That is one of the most prestigious places where all the known poets were buried, and that is one thing. And Chaucer, if you notice, the language what he has picked up in his writings was East Midland dialect, and that was kind of it was slightly different from the Anglo-Normans kind of language, where it had infused a lot of English words into it. He, in fact, revived the language of English, and then you can see the language of English growing after the work of Chaucer, that is the Canterbury Tales. Now, Canterbury Tales, it's in a verse and usually categorized as poetry. There are tales in which, and they are written in prose and poetic forms, and it is basically a kind of narration of tales by people who were on pilgrim, and each one is supposed to kind of narrate two stories, and then the whole collection of stories he wanted to compose it or bring it in proper book called as Canterbury Tales, but he could not. Where 30 members, 2 stories up and down, 2 stories back on return to the pilgrim, it would have counted to 120, but he couldn't do it. Only 30 he could pen down, and that was it. And then when you talk about his style, he had a very unique, elegant, and fascinating writing approach, showing influences of French literature, biblical history, and Old English literature. He demonstrates his powerful imagination and creative approach through simple yet effective and persuasive language. And of course, apart from Geoffrey Chaucer, Then you also have his contemporaries like William Langland, where he has written Piers Plowman. So important about this man, he had written it in a narrative, written in an unrhymed alliterative verse. Alliteration. This is one aspect. If you notice, this was very much popular during old English period, during Anglo-Saxon period. Now he tried to revive it. He brought it back during this period, that is the Chaucer's period, Chaucer's age of Chaucer, and he had penned down some poems in this accent and alliterative verse that was purely revolting against the French people. He did not want to take up their rhyme and metrical patterns, and he was upset because Piers Plowman, where he's like he wants to voice out being the voice of the poor people, where, as I told you, the common man never had a chance to kind of be vociferous or voice up, but here in his writing he brings it out, and he is the contemporary of Chaucer, Geoffrey Chaucer. And then you also have John Wycliffe. He he's a monk, and then the very important work during this period was perhaps his translation of the entire Bible from Latin to English. This had a huge influence in the 14th and in the subsequent centuries, because until then the Bible was was not accessible by the common people, and it was only by the clergy, and the interpretations were available only with the clergy, and they almost held a monopoly over Bible. So his translations were quite revolutionary in the sense it brought religion closer to the common man, and also ensured that religion doesn't remain as a monopoly of the church or the clergy. So from then on, you can even notice that the English, and there were three major aspects during that period. One was the 100 Years' War, and then you can even notice there was a Black Death, and then there was a peasant revolution, after which you can notice there was a decline of Old French dialect, and then a revival of English language. But of course, English, which emerged after this period, was not a pure English language. It had a lot of infusions of this French words into it, not just French. You also find Latin words also, the roots of the Latin words also you find in this. So it was not basically a pure language, but compared to the Old English, Middle English was somewhere closely comprehensible, just like modern English period.
Well, I would just would like to get your views on Canterbury Tales, and this will be my last question, because as you said, it's a collection of story, and it is being told by pilgrimage who were traveling to religious places. How it is different from Arabian Nights, or they have the same? They are sharing the same platforms, the same idea. That's what I'd like to know from you.
Well, honestly speaking, I haven't read Arabian Nights. Well, if you want me to, I can throw some light on Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. So this was basically, how he crafted the people, the characters in a unique way. Like you come across the tales of Wife of Bath, tale of second nun's tale. Okay, and there are so many tales where how he crafted each and every character, that is very interesting. So, and another thing is, it was in a poetic form, and it was simply a marvelous kind of a writing.
Well, it is, as usual, very interesting to really discuss about this era and the rise of English language from the effect of French language, which was used earlier in England. So it's lovely, and I will be taking forward this discussion in a future episode, and maybe discussing more literary aspects. And of course, we have left in today's the rise of press, and then along with the rise of press, the rise of literature, and that is is a quite interesting move when we are talking about the English language. So Revati ma'am, Dr. Revati, it is so interesting. We'll be meeting next time in next episode. Till then, you take care and be happy, and I look forward comments of our audience regarding this topic. In case if they want to add something more, we would welcome and look forward. So thank you so much, and bye bye, Revati ma'am. See you in
Thank you.
next
Yeah.
next episode. See you.
Thank you.
We had a quite interesting discussion with Mrs. G. Revati regarding the rise of Middle English literature. I look forward for your comments, your view on this topic, and I'll be meeting again in our next episode. Till then, you take care and bye-bye.